Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Linjer, der regulerer området, herunder beslutningskompetencen, ligesom jeg ønsker landstyrets vurdering af, hvorvidt...
Greenland is a truly fascinating country, one of the most northern and coldest nations in the world, and with a population of around 57,000, it has to be seen to be believed. Now, you may have heard Greenland pop up in the news recently, not necessarily for the brightest of reasons.
So I have a message tonight for the incredible people of Greenland, because we need Greenland for national security and even international security. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Despite being part of the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland operates autonomously. Although much of its budget comes from the Danes, and several political decisions are made in Copenhagen, Greenland and its people have their own rich and unique culture. But arguably, one of the biggest signposts of local culture, at least within the last century, is that of television. Even today, despite the growing presence of the online world, television still remains a good benchmark to get an idea into a country's culture and identity.
The producer is waiting at his microphone to speak his last word to the artist. The controllers are ready on vision and sound. The vision and sound are on. The station goes on the air.
Beginning just before World War II in the 1930s, and then exploding during the 1950s, television was a medium that was rather late to arrive in Nordic-based territories. Denmark would be the first, launching TV in 1954, closely followed by Sweden in 1956, Finland in 1957, and Norway in 1960. By the time Iceland launched their television service in 1966, Greenland was still without a dedicated broadcaster, at least when it came to TV. Radio Greenland, or the KNR, was and remains Greenland's national public broadcaster. Like many others, it began life on the radio, launching a service in 1956, several decades after not just its Nordic neighbours, but long after much of the world had introduced the wireless. By the 1960s, a decade when the vast majority of European territories had a television service of some kind, Greenlanders were still without one. There were some potential workarounds, however. Private transmitters were set up around the country so that viewers who had imported television sets could receive programming from a variety of different places. Those with NTSC models could pick up signals from Canada, and from 1966, those broadcasts could also be seen in colour. Those with PAL sets could pick up signals from the RUV in Iceland, exclusively in monochrome until around the mid-1970s when they switched over to colour broadcasting. You could go even further afield and receive programmes from Denmark itself, who were operating in full colour by the dawn of the 70s. This solution, that of receiving broadcasts from other countries, was a decent one for those who could afford to import a television set and be close enough to one of these private transmitters. But really, for all Greenlanders to truly have decent access to television, their own domestic service had to come into life at some point. In 1982, nearly 50 years from the launch of television, the medium finally landed in Greenland.
Alek Zapara tigilluaati maanilu issiaqatigaakka naalakkarsuissiulittaasuat Jonathan Motzfeldt aamma TV-utileqatigit kattuffiatiulittaasua Mogens Bloch Poulsen.
KNR debuted its television service in 1982, filming its programs in colour, but transmitting initially for the most part in black and white. The transition to colour came within the first few years, although smaller regions of Greenland would continue to receive their broadcast in monochrome until the early 1990s. But at long last, Greenlanders had their own public television service that they could call their own. Based out of the capital, Nuuk, KNR would provide a programme of content for its viewers, gradually expanding as time went on. One of its flagship shows was its news programme, Kanarok, which still exists today. Here's how it opened in the late 80s, early 90s. And here's how it opens in the 2020s. However, during its first few decades, a lot of programming shown on the KNR often originated from foreign broadcasters, primarily DR from Denmark. Undoubtedly, the challenge of producing a fully domestic service of programs with limited resources and a small audience base would have been a tough ask. The sharing of programs from fellow Nordic countries was further enhanced as the new millennium approached. For in 1997, KNR, and thus Greenland, became an associate member of Nordvision. This group was made up of Nordic broadcasters, with the aim of mutual cooperation and program sharing amongst one another. Its 5 primary members are, as you'd expect, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland and Iceland. Amongst its associate members are the Åland Islands, the Faroe Islands and of course Greenland. So now more than ever, programs from their Nordic neighbours could be shared and shown on KNR. Whilst programming was produced and made available in the Greenlandic language, many believe that there were far more foreign shows on the airwaves, a factor that wouldn't change on KNR for at least another decade. Around the start of 2013, things changed. The Danish channels from DR became free to air in Greenland, so the need to have their programming on KNR channels was largely unnecessary anymore. So KNR1, the flagship channel, became focused almost exclusively on producing and showing Greenlandic content for Greenlandic audiences, a prospect that largely could have only been dreamed about just 30 years earlier. Today, as well as being available domestically in Greenland, both KNR1 and KNR2 are streamed on YouTube, on the dedicated KNR channel. This is great for people like myself, so if I was so inclined, I can check out what sort of programs go out on these two channels, even if I don't understand a single word of it. Whilst even in the 2020s it faces its own challenges, it's fascinating to see how a television service can operate in such a remote location as Greenland. With such a small potential viewer base, the fact that they even made the effort to establish a domestic service instead of solely relying on foreign broadcasts and imports is indeed commendable. As the medium of television continues to change rapidly, I know I'll be fascinated to see where the KNR, and Greenland as a whole, goes with it. That's if it doesn't get invaded by the United States anytime soon, but that's another story.
And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
And now, another kick-ass Kanarok intro to see us out. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Liam Domain, AJ Mac 200017, Deck, Jen, Traffy, Evan Hart 41 Radio, Tim Ripley, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Mananel Thurman, John Wakefield, 40-something Manchild, Jerry Ralph, John McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Kat Hegarty, Stephen Oliver, Tegan, Shadowfiend 180X, Swan Ronson, Adam Gamer, Fonzie Daz, Real Random, and Seraphic Euphoria, our AMTV staff members.